Hello and welcome to another pointless Fire Emblem Engage tier list. This time we are going to be doing the Engage skills. So these are the skills that are not the Engage attacks and are not the Sync skills. Sync skills generally are inheritable, maybe not in all cases, but in any case are the skills that you get just for having the emblem equipped or synced. You don't have to actually actively be engaged. Whereas these are the skills where you actually have to actively be engaged, and they are not inheritable, I think, in all cases. But they aren't the engage, like the one-use engage attacks. You can keep using them over and over while you are engaged. So yeah, we're gonna look at these once again. Not gonna do the DLC. I mean, I do have some experience with the DLC ones, but more with the non-DLC. So we'll set that to the side for now. I'm gonna start out with 3 tiers this time because last time I ended up with 3 tiers and we're tiering the same number of things. So yeah, without any further ado, let's get started with Marth's Divine Speed. So this says user makes an additional follow-up attack that deals half damage. The other effects are that if you're a dragon unit, you also restore HP based on the damage dealt. And if you're a covert unit, it poisons. So I don't think the dragon and covert thing matters too terribly much. But being able to make an additional attack at half damage, I think, is really good. If you are attacking once, it's essentially a 50% increase in damage. If you're doubling, then it's essentially a 25% increase in damage, which makes it sound like it's worse when it's doubling. But I mean, it's obviously it's not. It's just to give a sense of like how the math works out. But yeah, plus 25% damage when you're doubling is pretty huge for being able to hit one rounding thresholds. Oh, I guess I should have said up front, this isn't, again, I'm not going to try to take availability into account here. I'm just going to evaluate them on their own terms, which is important in this case because Divine Speed, if you had access to Divine Speed the whole game, it would be friggin' amazing. You don't, unfortunately. So it definitely decreases its utility in the context of like, you know, how often are you actually going to be able to use it? But in terms of the effect that it has when you are able to use it, I think it's really, really good. You know, there's lots of ways to boost your damage, but this is a very simple, straightforward one, and the size of the boost is substantial. I mean, you do have to already be doing a decent amount of damage for it to put in work, but if you're not doing a decent amount of damage, well, like, you're probably not going to start going into, you know, like, there's probably no one skill that's going to make you start rounding things if you're doing little enough damage that this isn't, like, doing anything significant. All right, next up we have Echo. Echo allows you to make 2 different attacks with a tome at half damage. You don't get to move, you just have to like be in position to attack. I mean, you can target the same enemy multiple times. But you know, like, it's not like you can make one attack and then move somewhere else and make another attack. Dragon units get +1 maximum range when they use it, and mystical units do 60% damage rather than 50% damage. This one I think is not very good. The baseline case, so putting aside the mystical or the dragon thing for a second, is that you're basically doing the same amount of damage you would normally do, with the caveat that in conjunction with Celica's what's it called, tome, whatever the resonance, in conjunction with resonance, because resonance damage is applied on top, I think you can end up doing very slightly more damage with Echo. I'm not even sure if you do it every time or if it's just it depends on the rounding. But like, yeah, it's not doing much against a single target is where I'm going with this. Now, obviously, like there are situations where you can like target two enemies that are on low health. The utility of that I find is pretty narrow. It generally speaking, like you want to just completely kill enemies, and this is definitely at its most useful early in the game when that's harder to do. So like that is a relevant consideration for sure. But I think nonetheless that even then it's not doing that much because they do have to be like in the right position where you can actually reach them. I do think like with a mystical unit, like this definitely has some additional utility because it's only reducing damage by 40%, which means you are effectively getting, you're getting two attacks at 60%, so you're getting like a 120% damage, so that's a 20% damage boost, which is like, I guess, comparable to divine speed, but it is locked to a mystical unit, which basically means sages, mages and sages. And I don't think I actually don't think the as a primary attacker the sage class is very good anyway. Just because their speed is so poor. I'd generally rather be using a mage knight, but then the mage knight won't get this benefit for a magical attacker, or like IV, same thing. So that's a big restriction on that effect. Yeah, so I'm gonna put this in C. I don't think it's like totally useless, but I think it spends a good amount of time being pretty much useless, and like it only really comes in occasionally useful. Next up we have Gallop. So Gallop is +5 movement, very straightforward. If you're a dragon, you get +6 movement. If you're a cavalry, you get +7. If you're covert, you get +5, and all movement terrain costs are reduced to 1. And then that's it. Okay. This is, just absolutely ridiculously good. I think it's better than divine speed. The thing is, like, the way that you evaluate these sorts of things, like, there's different ways to think about it. One way would just be to say okay, you're picking these skills in a vacuum, like which ones do you want? And then another one is like in combination with the kit of the emblem. And so the one thing about Gallop is that I think it is the case that like Sigurd as an emblem, as a package, is not as good at setting characters up to one round enemies as like say Marth, because Marth doesn't just have divine speed, he also has a speed boost stat wise. So that is definitely, and I think Marth also boosts strength, and I don't think Sigurd boosts either of those. I know he boosts like defense and build, presumably one other thing, but maybe that's like dex or something. I don't remember, but I don't think he does either strength or speed. So like that is a big deal, and is one of the reasons it's harder to take advantage of this in conjunction with one rounding. Although Sigurd does have momentum, which does help with that. But looking at it kind of in isolation, I think that the huge movement boost is stronger than the damage boost. And it's also harder to replace. Like, you can do more things to boost damage between like tonics and engravings and forges and whatever. That the only way you can replicate the effective gallop is with movement staves, and even that is like limited, and it's not something like it requires another unit to participate. Like you can't just do it by yourself, like just get +5 movement. So yeah, I think it's really good. Okay, next up is adaptable, Leaf's adaptable, which allows you to automatically equip the quote-unquote best weapon for the scenario when counterattacking based on range and weapon triangle. The criteria for determining this are number one, it allows you to counterattack, so it's always gonna pick something where you can counterattack over something where you can't. Number two, has weapon triangle advantage if possible, or failing that, at least does not have weapon triangle disadvantage. And number three, deals bonus damage. Number four, has the highest combined might, hit, crit, and dodge. And number five, has the highest position in the user's inventory. So this... and I guess I should also mention, if you're a dragon unit, you get +30 hit when this activates. If you're a backup, you get +10 crit. If you're covert, you get +10 avoid. If you're armored, you get +5 defense. And if you're flying, you get +5 resistance. Okay. So, again, this is one that, like Sigurd's, looks better in isolation than it does in the context of Leaf's kit, because Leaf has some pretty trash engage weapons that compete for slots with your better weapons when this triggers. The most notorious of this being the Master Lance. You can play around that. The Master Lance only comes online once you unlock the level 10 bond conversation, so you can just not unlock the Master Lance. At that point, I think the only engage weapons you actually have access to are, I think it's just the Killer Axe, but I'm gonna double check that. Let's see. Yeah, you get the Killer Axe at level 1, and the Master Lance at level 10, and then you also get the Light Brand at level 15. Yeah, so you just have the Killer Axe, which is not too bad, because given the context in which you're generally wanting to use adaptable, like would not be surprising if you have your own Killer Axe anyway, and then you can just use that over the built-in one, which is better because you can engrave and forge it, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, you can work around that limitation. I mean, there are downsides to having to do that, right? Like, you don't get access to the higher tier sync skills. That way, you don't get the longer engage meter, or like shorter engage meter, longer engage duration. How much does that matter? I don't really know, but the specifically not being able to get up to like Vantage Plus and Vantage Plus Plus does seem like a potentially relevant downside. But in any case, like, looking at it in isolation, I think, this is, and well, I guess I should say that even in isolation, like, if you could just move this skill onto another emblem, you would still run into the thing where you engage and then you have these other emblem weapons that are competing with the weapons that you might prefer to be using. And granted, in some cases that would be fine, like depending on what the weapon is, but most of the emblem weapons after about, like, I don't know, the early mid-game or so are pretty crap, pretty useless the vast majority of the time. So, like, you would generally prefer to be using your own weapons. And it's really the weapon triangle thing that potentially comes in and prevents you from doing that, right? So if you're like getting attacked with like in the leaf case, for example, you're getting attacked with a sword, um, and you just want to be using a sword, right? It doesn't even need to be like, oh, I want to be using this axe, but I get broken. It could just be, I want to use a sword. It doesn't need to be a lance. Like, it's not like I'm going to get a break, right? But like, it is actually kind of weird how that works, because this is only if the foe initiates combat anyway. So like, you're never going to get a break. Having weapon triangle advantage in that context doesn't really matter. So I don't actually know why it doesn't just like say doesn't have weapon triangle disadvantage, but it doesn't. And so like that can be, like something that would trip you up even in the context of another emblems kit. Especially like if you end up, getting like a smash weapon equipped or something, where it's like you would be able to one round, but now you can't. They get to like, W or something, like because the weapon is heavy, like, all that kind of stuff. Although, other than Ike, I guess there's few, if and maybe even no other smash weapons on emblems, at least of the non DLC ones. But whatever. But I guess Byleth that has like in some configurations has the Amir. Anyway, so yeah, it's all of this is to say this is like even in isolation, like let alone in the context of Leaf's kit, this is a good skill, but also an awkward one. The primary use case is of course the whole like, I'm gonna do the Vantage crit build thing, and I want to be able to switch between ranged and melee combat, because it's hard to get crit on a 1 to 2 range weapon, so instead you switch between a 1 range and a 2 range killer weapon, that sort of thing. Definitely like a very strong and relevant thing to be able to do. I don't think it's as universally applicable as the player phase stuff that I've put into A tier so far, though, and between that and the finickiness, I'm going to say that this is a B tier skill. Yeah. All right. So next up we have Rise Above, +5. This gives you +5 levels. I think so. Obviously, if you're using fixed growths, it's just going to give you the levels that you would get. I'm assuming that it essentially uses fixed growths even if you're not using fixed growths, like for the purposes of this skill. So like it certainly says like, level and stat bonus is proportional to the user's growth rates. So I'm assuming that's going to be the case. The additional effects, dragons get an extra level, cavalry gets +1 movement, armor gets +5 max HP, and yeah, that's it. So the net effect here, if you got a 40% growth rate, you're gonna get +2. You got a 60%, you're gonna get +3. That's a pretty reasonable estimate for what it's going to do for your relevant stats, right? Like your 40 to 60 is like a reasonable range to expect your growths to fall in. So you're getting like +2 to +3 in a bunch of relevant stats. That's definitely very good. +2 to 3 strength, +2 to 3 speed, generally going to be the most impactful things. It is cool that you get the HP. I want to say like the HP that you gain from this skill isn't like unhealed or whatever, right? You get that HP like on both sides of the slash. So like this came up for me once in my the playthrough I just completed, where Lyndon had this equipped and he went down to 1 HP because of holdout, and then he engaged and this like reactivates holdout because now he's above 1 HP, which I think is neat. It's not like super relevant to how good this skill is, but I think it's neat. Anyway, I definitely think this skill is a step down from Gallop and Divine Speed. The amount of like this is granted, this is going to do more to get you to a doubling threshold than either of those two are, but it's still not going to do much more than like a if any more than like a speed tonic. So that is, it's definitely nice, but it's not like going to like fundamentally change like what your unit is capable of doing in the way that Gallop is, and to a lesser extent Divine Speed. Because like honestly, like 25% increase in damage, like you can go from, it's like an enemy, let's say there's an enemy with 50 HP and you're hitting them for like 20 times 2, like getting an extra 10 damage there is a lot. Like that's hard. Well, it's definitely not impossible, but it is harder to replicate with other effects than getting like a couple points of speed. But still, I do think this is like quite a good skill. I think I'm gonna say this is still A tier, just lower than the other two. Okay, next up we have called doubles. So this summons 4 illusory doubles in the spaces adjacent to the user. They have 1 HP, 0 movement, and all other stats are the same as the user. They have the Manikati equipped. They always make chain attacks alongside the user when the user initiates combat, regardless of where they are. So like they're infinite range chain attackers. I don't actually know, now that I realize it, like it says they always make chain attacks, but I don't know if that means they're always considered to be in chain attack range, or if that means they also bypass the 80% chain attack check and they just like have 100% chain attack hit rate. That might be not hit rate in the sense of the like, well, I guess it would be hit rate, yeah, because chain attacks can't like no, I'm thinking of this the wrong way around. Sorry. Chain attacks have an 80% hit rate, but they always proc if they're in range. I'm thinking of dual assist is the thing that doesn't always proc. Okay, so this is going to be it always procs, but they're still going to have that 80% hit rate. Right. Okay. Sorry. Anyway, then the other effects are that dragon units, it says they summon up to 5 doubles. I don't know how that works. I guess one of them is in like the diagonal spot. That's weird because it's not like, well, I don't think it's the case that when you summon the 4, if somebody's standing next to you, that you get another one. I think you just get 3. How? What? And then it says for flyers, the doubles have +10 avoid. Okay. I'm really confused about this summon up to 5 for dragon units. How does that work? Huh. Well, in any case, I don't actually think that matters very much. So I think this skill is honestly just bad. Like, I'm gonna say this is the worst one, at least so far. A couple reasons for this. Number one, it requires an action. None of this other stuff requires an action. I mean, you could say Echo requires an action, but it's just like you're attacking. Like it doesn't like it's not a passive skill like the other stuff, but it doesn't require you to do something that isn't attacking. So that's number one. Number two, the doubles take up space in a way that's like really annoying a lot of the time. Like there were times when I would be like trying to find a use for this thing. It's like, okay, my Lin user, they don't need to do anything this turn. Maybe I can summon doubles. Then I'd be like, oh, but if I summon doubles, then like that'll get in the way of my repositions. That'll get in the way of my dances. Like, for instance, if I need to move my Lin user, dance them, move them again to attack or something like that. Well, I can't dance for them if the doubles are surrounding them. So that doesn't work. It like gets in the way of the goddess dance. I don't actually know if I've tried to reposition the doubles themselves. But like it just like clogs things up. Now you can use this to your advantage. Like you can use it as a defensive barrier type thing, but I think it's quite bad at that. like particularly compared to like the Dragon Vein stuff on Corrin. But I just like you've still got like your actual combat unit like in the middle of this block. So like if there's ranged attacks, they can still attack them. So if you're just like scared of the enemies, that's not necessarily going to solve the problem. And then the doubles are also not going to counterattack very effectively. They're not going to like be very good at killing enemies, and like that's generally what you want to be doing. So yeah, I think in theory the chain attacks can be nice. In practice, they don't apply to Astrostorm, which is like the biggest thing you're going to want to do from long range, where you're not so bothered about like having these doubles in the way. And then like having the time to like summon the doubles and then like move forward and attack some enemy that you weren't going to kill without the chain attacks, but you are going to kill with the chain attacks. Like, it's just, I just find that this skill to be like actually pretty useless. Unfortunately. All right. Next up, we have Sacred Twins. So this is going to be a weird one to evaluate. So Sacred Twins changes Lunar Brace and Solar Brace to Eclipse Brace, and changes Gentility and Bravery to Blue Skies for all allies. Okay, so that means we need to talk about Lunar Brace, Solar Brace, Gentility, and Bravery. Gentility and Bravery are easy enough to talk about. Gentility is +3, or -3 damage taken, I should say. Bravery is +3 damage dealt. They both upgrade to Gentility Plus and Bravery Plus, which is +5 or -5. And then there's Lunar Brace and Solar Brace. So Lunar Brace is if you attack with a physical weapon, initiate combat with a physical weapon, you deal an extra 20% damage. You deal an extra damage equal to 20% of the foe's defense. And then the plus version is 30% of the defense. And then Solar Brace is if you initiate combat, you restore HP equal to 30% of damage dealt, or the plus version is 50% of damage dealt. Fortunately, I don't think either of those has like a class specific modifier, because there's already enough complexity going on here. And the same thing for Gentility and Bravery. Those also are not modified by like class type, and neither is Sacred Twins. And I guess I should say what Eclipse Brace and Blue Skies are, but Blue Skies is just the combination of Gentility and Bravery. So +3 damage dealt and -3 damage taken, or 5 and 5 for the plus version. And Eclipse Brace is that you get both of the Lunar and Solar Brace effects. So you get the extra damage if you're using a physical weapon based on defense, and then you also heal damage. Heal based on the damage dealt, that is. Okay. So, the other thing to note about this is that applies to all users, and both Lunar Brace / Solar Brace and Gentility / Bravery are inheritable skills. So you can potentially have a whole bunch of units running around with this. Okay. So the thing about Sacred Twins as a skill is all that it's doing is changing Lunar or Solar Brace to Eclipse Brace and Gentility or Bravery to Blue Skies. It is not giving you the effects, like the baseline effect. Essentially it's giving you whichever them you weren't using. So, if you're in Solar mode, you have Solar Brace and Bravery, and if you're in Lunar mode, you have Lunar Brace and Gentility. And what it is doing when you activate this is it's saying, okay, now you're in both Solar and Lunar mode. The thing about that is that a lot of the time, not all of the time, but a lot of the time, the um, you can get most, if not all, of the value of what you care about out of this from your choice of mode. The primary exception to this being if you are using a physical weapon and you need the combination of bravery and lunar brace. So you need that like sort of defense penetrating damage, and you need the +3 to 5 or 5 from bravery. Like gentility in general, I think is whatever. Like reducing damage taken is good, but it's not like that important. It's more important to deal damage. Bravery deals damage. Lunar brace deals damage. Solar brace just heals you. So like ideally you would want to be running lunar brace and bravery, and this is the skill that lets you do that. But that's only true if you're using a physical weapon. And the thing about the Erica ring is that it boosts your magic, but not your strength. So it does kind of encourage putting it on a magic user, in which case Lunar Brace doesn't do anything, in which case all you really care about is bravery, in which case this skill doesn't matter. So it kind of depends on how you're using the Erica ring. If you're using it on a magic user, or like, you know, I was using it on a Radiant Bow user, then this skill potentially does very little. Although it does also like affect your, you know, your twin strike, which is, I guess twin strike doesn't strictly speaking have to be with a physical weapon, because you could use 11 sword. I guess I don't really have a sense for how effective that would be. But I think generally speaking, like running this on like a pure magic user means your twin strike is just probably not going to be very good, because the Ephraim Lance attack isn't going to be very good. So that's only really going to matter if you are running it on somebody who's either like a mixed attacker or a physical attacker. Anyway, yeah, so like I said, this one is really complicated to evaluate. But basically, if you're running this on a magic user, I think this skill is actually not doing very much. If you're running it on a physical attacker, I think the skill is good. And of course, like I say running it, I mean, what does that mean? There's the Erica user, but then there's also anybody else who inherits it. So like you could end up in the situation where the magical attacker themselves has the ring equipped because they get the magic boost, doesn't really care that much about activating this. But then if you're running, of course you have to be running both Lunar Brace and Lunar/Solar Brace and Gentility/Bravery on somebody else, which is pretty expensive. Like most likely you're just going to do one or the other. And if you're going to do one or the other, you might as well just take Bravery, and then you don't have to deal with this nonsense. You just get extra damage at the end. But if you were running both of them, then, you know, on like some physical attacker, then even though the Erica user doesn't really care that much about activating this, that other unit or units might care about activating this. All of which is to say, I'm going to put this in B tier, below adaptable. I think it is definitely useful. But I think that like you can get, like I said, a long way with just like toggling between like solar and lunar modes and getting what you need out of that, especially if you're running it on a magic user, which I do think makes a lot of sense, because as I said, you get the magic boost. So like even though you don't get the lunar brace effect, like you're kind of offsetting that by getting, you know, plus like 4 extra damage, I think it is, based on just having +4 magic, which is still like substantial. And 20% of somebody's defense, I mean, it depends on the enemy type, but you know, like in the late game, you know, you're certainly going to run into enemies with more defense than that, and So that will be doing more damage, but by hitting resistance instead, you are doing more damage because their resistance is generally going to be lower. So like it's complicated, but I think I do think it ultimately works out pretty well to run it on a magic user, all things considered. Okay, anyway. Whew. So next up we have Lagu's friend. This is Ike's skill. It you get minus 50% damage taken, but it sets your avoid to 0. For dragon units, this is minus 60% damage taken. This skill's alright. It doesn't do anything to help you kill enemies, so that's a pretty big knock on it. Other than letting you to survive to fight more enemies, I guess, which is, definitely relevant. Having 0 avoid obviously means like you're gonna get hit by everything. I think that's like not that big of a drawback given the kind of unit that's going to want to be using this anyway. Because like first of all, minus 50% damage taken is a lot. And second of all, like, in Ike's kit in particular, it comes combined with Resolve, which boosts your defenses. Ike, I think, also gives a defense boost, like strength and defense, I think. And then additionally, he has like, I think the Ragnall boosts res, but the Irvan boosts defense. He definitely improves your tanking capabilities. Of course, if you took this skill out of the context of Ike's kit, it definitely wouldn't work as well. But if what you want is like a unit that can like get hit a bunch, but then like counter attack and kill, and they don't need to rely on a void tanking. They're just gonna like absorb hits. Like this will definitely promote your ability to do that. I think it's kind of outclassed in that respect by Vantage, but it's still nice, and it's nice even in conjunction with Vantage, because it's still nice to be able to like not have to worry about like getting one shot or getting like crit to death or whatever by like a big hit. All right, and before you get knocked into Vantage range. Although there is a flip side of that, which is that if you like our Vantage gets around breaks, and this doesn't get around breaks. So, there can be scenarios where you'd actually rather take more damage from like a non-breaking attack, push you in Vantage range, and now you can Vantage the enemies that get breaks on you. So yeah. Altogether, where does this slot? I think I'm gonna. It's definitely not C tier. It's definitely not A tier. It's B tier. But in terms of relative to these two, I think that's a tough one. I think I'm gonna say it goes between them. But not. Yeah, I don't know. This one, this one is the Sacred Twins is so hard to evaluate, and this one is not easy to evaluate either because it's so context dependent. But yeah, I think that's what I'm gonna go with. Okay. Next up, we have Augment, Micaiah's skill, +5 maximum range when using staves, +1 range to the area of effective staves. Dragons get +6 range. Key adepts get an additional 20% HP healing output from staves. This is the best. It's so good. Oh my god. Oh, what the actual heck is like I I don't like think it's actually likely that it played out that way, but there is part of me that wonders if the entire reason for the way that they like design bosses in this game is because of this skill. This skill lets you move big bunches of units around. I mean, maybe in like the combination of this one and the goddess dance, but like you move like a whole bunch of units around and you can just like mob a boss. Like I think it's more likely that it went the other way around, where it's like you can afford to give the player this skill because you've designed the bosses in a way where they, they don't like just go down to like one, strong attack or whatever. But man, there is part of me that wonders, like, did they like come up with this and they're like, oh man, all bosses are going to be so trivial now. Like, what do we do? But yeah, this skill is absolutely busted to, like, to like just ridiculous levels. It's like, I'm actually, maybe I should have 4 tiers because maybe I need this to be, okay, hold on. We're gonna add a row above this one. We're gonna call this B tier. We're gonna do that. Doop, doop, doop. Oh, sorry. It should be C. D. Doop, doop, doop. Yeah, I think this is more representative, honestly. It's like the ability to multi-warp, multi-rewarp, multi-rescue is so good, and in conjunction with the additional distance, I just like cannot overstate how good this skill is. It is just completely insane. And the other thing is that, like, something that I don't even bother to use it for, but like if you want to, like, multi-target like freeze, multi-target entrap, multi-target silence, multi-square obstruct, multi-target what's the break staff called? Fracture. Like, I don't think any of that stuff is nearly as relevant, but like it can still do stuff even if you don't want to, like, try to play maps super quickly by warping your units around or rescuing or whatever. It's just ridiculously good. Ridiculously good. Honestly, like I generally like don't like having like the S tier, but I wonder, like, these, it does actually kind of feel like this would be like a fairer way of doing it, because like these skills are still like insanely good. It's just that this skill is completely bonkers. So we'll do that, just even though it, like, I've generally called the top tier A, just because I don't know, it feels weird to say that these are only B tier skills. Okay, so then we have Bondage Shield. Oh, Bondage Shield. All right. So Bondage Shield, you activate this to have an 80% chance to nullify damage dealt by the first attack made against adjacent allies. Dragon units have a 90% chance. Cavalry units have guaranteed defense of other cavalry units. Armored units the same. Flying units the same, with armored and flying and flying. Oh, and key adepts have 100% proc rate, just period. So this skill, I don't get very much value out of this, because it is like, how do I say this? I find this like way too narrow in its application for going quickly. Like, basically, if I'm like, when I'm moving quickly, I'm kind of doing one of two things. One is I'm going out and like hitting key enemies and blowing them up. And that can include the boss or whatever. The other thing I'm doing is I'm enemy phasing big groups of units in a context where I have like a specific matchup advantage. Now that matchup advantage might just be Kagetsu is really good and he has a tomahawk and he just kills whatever. Like, but it might also be like something more specific, like, you know, Pandreo against a bunch of generals armed with smash weapons, where he can just one round them before they even get to attack him or something like that, right? Like it depends. There's various ways that can realize itself, but the upshot of this is that like Bondage Shield is specifically good for the latter case, like of enemy phasing, but it's only for like you have a unit that's not going to survive on their own, so you need to protect them, but the units that's doing the protecting needs to not themselves be vulnerable to the enemies. And there are ways that can happen, right? Like they could just be really good in their own right, although then you wonder why they can't just kill the enemies themselves. It could be that the enemies are all one range and the enemies can't reach the Bonded Shield unit, and they can really reach the other unit. That's not that doesn't really come up that often in my experience, but it could happen. It could just be that like the enemies are arranged in a way where they're like right out of range, so they just can't like reach. Like even though they have a 2-range weapon, like they can only reach the front unit. That's pretty specific. It's not very likely that you have so many enemies where like you need the Bonded Shield to protect the front unit, but they can't reach the Bonded Shield unit. And then like, okay, so the other thing the Bonded Shield can do is it can apply this to multiple units, but the value of that drops off really quickly after the first unit or maybe two, because like are enemies attacking you from all directions and it doesn't matter who they attack. Like you've got this whole formation of 5 units and all 5 of them are prepared to take on all these different enemies. Like that doesn't seem very likely. There is if you have the DLC, there is a way to like significantly improve all of this, which is you can combine it with Soren's like assigned decoy, and then you can potentially have like whatever, my Bonded Shield unit would die, but they just don't get attacked, and I, set this other unit up that's like really good at killing enemies but not good at surviving, and boom, boom, boom. Well, we're not really talking about DLC right now, so that doesn't come into play. By itself, I think like this just is like hard to make work in the context of playing quickly. Now, if you're not playing quickly and you just want like you just want to kill like a handful of enemies on enemy phase with like, a couple of units that you protect and you don't have to worry about them dying. Like they're not that strong, but they can get the job done. Like, yeah, sure. It's useful for that kind of thing. Like, you just like, you can't do the thing where you just take on like hordes of enemies with it in the vast majority of cases, because there's like, there's too many like constraints on like all of these things that I mentioned. But if you're moving more methodically, like you can definitely take advantage of this to have like a safer, more reliable enemy phase. So with all of that said, I'm gonna say this is C tier, but better than Echo and Call Doubles. Although honestly, I could be convinced to move it below Echo. I think if I could find like, I feel like part of my motivation for this is that like I personally haven't tended to find like actual applications for Echo very much, but I could believe that if you like in this like less availability focused thing, that you could find some applications for it that either that I've missed or that just like don't actually come up because you don't have the the ring at the time or whatever. So yeah, I could believe that Echo should actually be above this, but I'm gonna go with that for now. All right, so then we've got Dreadful Aura. If Whoa, interesting. Dreadful Aura on the Fire Emblem Wiki links to the page on Heartseeker, which is a totally different skill. It does have a similar icon, but I don't understand why they're considered the same skill. They seem to have nothing much to do with each other in terms of effect. All right, anyway, so Dreadful Aura inflicts freeze status on the target and foes adjacent to the target for 1 turn after combat if the user initiates combat. So this is like, it's not helping you kill enemies, but what it is doing is helping you kill enemies in a way that's safe. Like on player phase, you can go in on a group of enemies where you would not be able to enemy phase them, and if you don't actually need to kill them, you just need to kill like one particular one, or you don't even need to kill any of them. You just need to move through that area of the map to get somewhere else. And again, you wouldn't be able to kill the enemies, but you can just like lock them all down and prevent them from killing you, and then you can move on with your life. Like, I do think that's useful. And you know, against like bosses, for example, if the boss is mobile, you can, you know, like, you don't have to worry about like, oh, I've got to set up, you know, I'm gonna 2-turn kill this boss, and I've got to set up like to make sure that like the boss like doesn't go after my dancer, doesn't go after my healer, like just whatever weaker units. You know, I want Alir to buff somebody's damage, but then the boss could kill Alir. Like, you can prevent all of that from being an issue by just locking them down with Dreadful Aura. So I think that is good. I definitely don't think it's A tier good, but I think it is good. I'm gonna say B tier, above Lague's Friend, below Adaptable. I think, you know, it has good utility, but you know, the fact that it doesn't directly let you actually kill enemies still makes it not as good as the skills that let you kill enemies. But in terms of survivability, I do think it like outclasses Lague's Friend for the most part. I mean, Lague's Friend is better if you do need to actually route the enemies, right? There aren't that many route maps though, and Lague's Friend isn't like the best thing for dealing with that anyway. Like, there's better ways to do that. So yeah. All right. Next up, we have Instruct. Byleth's Engage skill. So this just grants stat buffs that are different for any different class type to all allies within 2 spaces. For dragon units, it's +3 to all stats except HP, I guess. For backups, it's +4 strength. For cavalry, it's +10 dex. For covert, it's +5 speed. For armors, it's +5 defense. For flyers, it's +5 res. For mystical, it's +4 magic. And for key adepts, it's +10 luck. Lol. So yeah, I think this skill is very strong. The ability to buff a whole bunch of units and give them, you know, some combination of speed and attack power, depending on whether you're talking about like a dragon or you're just going to go with like the +5 speed or the +4 strength, the +4 magic. I think all of that's really good. Like, that does help you kill enemies, and it helps multiple units kill enemies, which is really nice. The main thing that holds this skill back is the fact that it's on the same unit that has the Goddess Dance, which, like, although, I mean, the Goddess Dance essentially applies this skill to the danced units, so you still get the effect. But the point is, like, in terms of, like, how many times are you clicking the Instruct command? Well, you're, like, that is limiting the number of times you're going to do that, because you're going to use the Goddess Dance. But, like, if you sort of evaluate this, like, you know, a little bit independently of that, you know, then, you know, like, don't don't like hold that against the skill, like then it moves up. So like yeah, if you're evaluating this in the context of Byleth's kit, like on the one hand, compared to something like call doubles, which I mean, has other problems, but like call doubles is going to be on one of your combat units because like the Lin ring, it gives you speed. The doubles are supposed to help you chain attack. Like you want a combat unit to be using that ring. The Byleth ring, you don't mostly care. I mean, Thyrsus is like the reason to do it, but mostly this is going to be a support unit. And so, the having to use an action to buff other units is a fine thing to do on a support unit. If it didn't have the Goddess Dance, it would be significantly like better on its own. Obviously, the Byleth ring would be worse without the Goddess Dance, like a lot worse. But Instruct would look better by comparison. But I still think it's good even without that. Like you're going to use it like when you're engaged, to do the dance. Like you might as well use it unless you're like one turning the map. There's no reason not to use it on the other turns, and the effect is powerful. Altogether, I think. Is it? My question is, I think this is an A tier skill. My question is it better than Rise Above, and is it better than Divine Speed? I don't think it's better than Gallop. But I do think it's better than Rise Above. Divine Speed, though, that's a tough call. I think it probably is better than Divine Speed. Yeah, I think it goes here. It's just like the fact that it applies to multiple units really, really does a lot to like, and the radius is really nice. Like the 2 range thing, like you can get a lot of units with Instruct. All right, finally we have Attuned. This is the Alir engage skill. If user initiates combat and defeats their target, grants a stat buff dependent on the unit type of the user to their engaged partner. So if you basically it gives you +4 to everything, and then it gives you something else as well. So if you're a dragon, it gives you +5 to everything. If you're backup, it gives you and your engaged partner. So if you're dragon, it gives the 2 of you +5 to everything. If you're a backup, it gives +6 strength and +4 of everything else. Cavalry, it's 6 dex. Why Instruct gives 10 dex compared to like 4 or 5 of the other stats, but then this one gives 6 dex? I don't know, but it's weird. Anyway, Covert, it's 6 speed. Armor, 6 defense. Flying, 6 res. Mystical, 6 magic. And Kieta, 6 luck, lol. It's basically what you would expect based on like those types and how that maps. Anyway, so but the activating condition is you have to like attack and defeat something in order to proc this. So I will just say up front, like this, it's not DLC, so I didn't throw it out, but like I have no experience with trying to use this. Like the number of times I've used Engage Plus on Alir across, like my playthroughs is like 2. It's like maybe 3. I don't know. I find it like that in general, the effects of the Alir ring are not as desirable as the effects of whatever ring I already have on a given unit. And then that kind of also goes for Alir themselves. Like I'd rather have Alir use whatever ring they're using, So like it's like, and then like, in this last playthrough, for example, like the one time I used it is against the final boss. And like, guess what? Like I'm not going to defeat the final boss and then get this bonus and be able to use it because the chapter will be over. Now, I mean, that's, if you're using it in some other chapter, right? Like that, you're not necessarily going to run into that problem. Like, but, it is true though that like this does not really come into play against bosses in general. So like the most useful case for this is definitely going to be like in a route type map where you can kill something on player phase and then you can have this huge buff for enemy phase, and it is a huge buff. It is really like a huge buff. That I do think is like very nice. I mean, you can definitely also do something like, if you're going to fight a boss, like you kill one enemy kind of like along the way, you power up and then you go in on the boss. So, not useless from that perspective. And if you're evaluating it, sort of in isolation, then you don't have to get into the whole like, yeah, but that means you have to do engage plus rather than using whatever other ring, and also you had to like stand next to each other and blah, 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 blah. Well, actually, you don't actually have to stand next to each other. You can like run over, engage plus, and then run back, and like it doesn't cost movement. So that whole thing is weird. But anyway, I altogether, I think if you throw out availability issues and sort of set to the side as well, like the limitation of like, okay, well, what ring, would I rather be using or what have you, then I think like just in isolation, like what is this actually doing for you? Like assume you're engaged, you attack, you kill something, you get this buff, the other person get this buff as well. How good is that? I do think it's pretty good. I think the requirement to get the kill first keeps it from being A tier level good, but I do think it's B tier. I think like as an enemy phase skill, I think it's better than Lagu's Friend, and probably better than Dreadful Aura, because given the choice, I would rather kill enemies than just lock them down. Is it better than Adaptable? Yeah, probably. So we'll go here. I'm not confident in this at all, to be clear. But that's what I'm going to go with. And so there you have it. That's a ranking of the Engage skills. Maybe we'll do engage attacks next. Maybe that's what we'll do. But for now, thanks for watching, and let me know what you think about these skills and how good they are, and why I'm completely wrong about everything, especially attuned. So, thanks for watching, and until next time.